So this last weekend, the Gran Turismo World Series headed over to Los Angeles for round 3 of this year's championship. And of course, part of that was the Predict the Winners campaign. And finally today we can go ahead and claim our free credits in game. But before we get into this video, I'm trying to get this channel to 70,000 subscribers. So if you want to stay up to date with everything GT7 and motorsport gaming related, then feel free to leave a like, subscribe and turn those notifications on. Anyway, let's get to it. So first of all, let's recap on the season so far and what happened during round 3, and we'll start off with the Manufacturers Cup then. Of course, this is always the first race of those two live streams. And well, when it comes to the Manufacturers Cup in 2025, we'd had pretty much a two-way battle for the lead, and that would be between Subaru and BMW. Of course, Subaru getting the better of the BMW team on both occasions, both winning in London and Berlin. But this time around it would be completely different. Subaru would end up having an absolute stinker of a race in Los Angeles, and BMW were pretty much nowhere. Now of course this would pretty much leave the door wide open for some of the other manufacturers to gain some much needed points before the finals in December. As for pole here at Road Atlanta, it would be AMG finally taking pole position. They've looked fairly strong all season in terms of their overall pace, but again a race victory has really just not come their way. Again, mainly through the season it's been between Subaru and the other German manufacturer BMW. But AMG would start on pole and all of the cars would begin on the medium compound of tyre, and we would see a very close battle up and down the grid. The racing was absolutely incredible, I must say. Now in terms of the early stages, it would actually be Ferrari taking an early lead and pretty much leading all the way through to the first bunch of pit stops. I think to most people that's been watching the Manufacturers Cup so far this year, it was pretty surprising to see Ferrari up there with that ancient 458 GT3. Again, that car has just seemingly been pretty much mainly towards the back so far this season, and well, here they were leading a race at Road Atlanta and really looking like the car to beat overall. Now in terms of the early stages, as mentioned, Subaru had an absolute stinker here. On lap 6 they would have a massive off which absolutely blew their chances of getting that perfect 3 out of 3 victories and pretty much threw away any chance of them taking away a decent point haul here from round 3. And again, as mentioned, BMW didn't look like they were doing much either, and from here that would mean both of the two leading manufacturers would be losing points in Road Atlanta. Now when we got to the mid stages of the race, we would really get to know who the main runners were here, and whilst it was incredibly close up front, the main battles were between the likes of the Ferrari, Toyota, AMG and Porsche, and well, Toyota would be getting pretty elbows out here. The Toyota would hit the Porsche into the AMG on lap 16, and from there AMG's race was pretty much over, going into the gravel trap. However, Toyota wouldn't get a penalty for this. Now in terms of the rest of the race, Porsche would go on to take the lead on lap 20 after the pit stops, and from there they would just go ahead and defend from Toyota pretty much all of the race until lap 28, when a little bit of a slip from the Toyota would allow the Porsche to take a little bit of breathing room. However, on the final few laps, Toyota would come back into the final few corners, but Porsche would go on to defend and actually take victory here at Road Atlanta. Of course, at the wheel of the Porsche for round 3 in Los Angeles would be Angel Inestrosa, who of course returns in 2025 to both the Manufacturers Cup and the Nations Cup, and of course gave Porsche victory here at Road Atlanta, and this would have actually been my pick for the Manufacturers Cup. Now I'm not quite sure who else was actually picking Porsche here, considering the car really wasn't dominant and it was a bit of a surprising victory. I don't think anybody really would have predicted them to go on to take victory, but they actually did. Really, it was kind of Ferrari's race to lose after the early stages, but unfortunately a two-stop strategy from their driver would go on to cost them in the long run, with the eventual victors and of course the top 3 pretty much all doing a single stop race. So moving on then next to the Nations Cup. Now very similar to what's happened in the manufacturers, we'd seen the same victor for both round 1 and round 2 in the Nations Cup. And in terms of the sprint race, well, this would be taking place at Watkins Glen, and it would be the Dutchman De Bruin who would take a pole position for this race. Again, continuing continuing his fairly solid start to the season. Now, in terms of the sprint race, we would see a pretty similar thing. Serrano will go on to take victory, again continuing that perfect season he's having so far. And during the race at Watkins Glen, we would see a pretty big off from Gallo, who would eventually begin to recover. In fact, it was incredibly impressive how he didn't manage to completely wreck himself by a good amount of seconds, and he would actually continue on to, manage to at least finish the race properly. Now, in terms of the main race then, again, we would see Serrano taking pole, which looked to be a perfect 3 out of 3 race victory. This would take place at Daytona Road Course, and it would be an incredibly close start. Miyazano would end up with a 1-second penalty for a collision with a vehicle, and after the first lot of pit stops, it would be a similar thing where a lot of cars were just slipstreaming, but much more aggressive this time around in a huge slipstream train. Now, the race itself didn't really seem that alive until the final 10 laps or so, and on lap 21 going into the first corner, things would begin to get a little bit ugly. It was an incredibly awkward first corner, and pretty much 7 cars were battling out for a victory at this point. Now, this would pretty much continue on until lap 24, when Euro would go ahead and take the race lead, and once again this 7-car battle would continue. Now, on lap 29 there was a bit of controversy where Lebutele would pretty much entirely T-bone Miyazano and end up with a 3-second penalty, kissing goodbye to both their chances at race victory. And in the end we would end up with a Spanish 1-2, with Serrano actually ending up second this time around and Jura taking the race victory. So round 3 would finally see a break in these same victors, with Subaru ending up losing out and of course Serrano ending up P2, but of course getting some very solid points on the board, and of course Jura would take race victory, but that does continue the Spanish domination in the Nations Cup. So as for round 3 of the Predict the Winners campaign then, if you chose for the Manufacturers Cup Porsche and Angel Inostroza, you would go ahead and be awarded 1,000,000 credits. And when it comes to the Nations Cup, if you chose Poliora, you would go ahead and once again be credited with 1,000,000 credits, a total of 2,000,000. Now, I understand most people know how to do this, but if you forgot who you predicted, then this is the best way to check. Head into the world map and then you'll see in the garage that special gifts are waiting for you. As you can see, I made both of the correct predictions, so I'm going to go over to the gifts tab, and as we can see, we have a reward for the Predict the Winners campaign for the Manufacturers Cup and a reward for the Predict the Winners campaign for the Nations Cup, both awarding me 1,000,000 credits each and a total of 2,000,000 credits. Now, both of these did end up going live this morning, so of course if you did make the correct predictions for both the Nations Cup and the Manufacturers Cup, you can go ahead and claim your free credits now. Huge thank you to everybody watching this video, and I will see you once again tomorrow. Take care guys, peace.